1, 2, 3. These guys are talking pro wrestling?
Oh, yeah! It's time! It's time!
As the heel turns with Gaz, Vinny, Zach Bai, and the Tig Man.
It is Gaz here with you from 104.5 The Team and 104.5theteam.com on As the Heel Turns podcast. We're talking professional wrestling, and this is episode number 1. So to start off episode 1, the top 5 people not to be world champion. First, we're going to introduce who is a part of this As the Heel Turns podcast. I'm going to go to my left first. Again, I'm from ESPN Radio 104.5 The Team. My man to the left, Tig, go ahead and give you a little background.
Tig Man, Q103, Albany's rock station. Fan of pro wrestling for 30-plus years. 1985, 86 was when I started. And good to be with all you great people here, part of this podcast. This is awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited as well. I'm Zach Bai from ESPN Radio 104.5 The Team. On the morning show Big Board Sports, and one of the broadcasters for the University of Albany's football and basketball program. But since I was a little kid, these are the chords that like to get plucked. Professional wrestling has always resonated with me, like you, Tig. My love of professional wrestling, although I was younger than you, it started in those years. Yep. So that's where my foundation comes from.
Nice.
And I'm kind of like Vinny and Zach in the sense that we're kind of growing up in the Monday Night War era, the late 1990s. So, Vinny, how about you? You're the youngest of this crew here.
Hey, that's not a bad thing.
That's right, definitely not.
That means I get more tail more often.
I haven't not
There's
seen
a
proof
lie.
of that. Accessing the network and watching Diva matches does not qualify as
But
tail.
you are the encyclopedia of knowledge, and we're going to find that out throughout the podcast, and how deep this knowledge goes to your wrestling background.
All right, well, I'm Vinny. I'm also from Q103, Albany's rock station. You can check me out in my beautiful mug at Q103albany.com.
Look at that with the cheap plug already.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
right. I love it.
I started watching wrestling, I want to say about 96, 97. So I'm a little bit more of a late, I wouldn't even say late bloomer, because I started when I was like 5.
Yeah.
I can't even remember the first time I watched wrestling. I know I was watching it, but nope, I've loved it my whole life. Been watching it ever since. I really haven't missed a week, except for like a few weeks ago when Charlotte won at Hell in the Cell. I boycotted 1 week there.
You boycotted.
Yes.
The first time
strong stance.
in close to 2 decades. But again, you're just the latest out of the womb. We are all big-time professional wrestling fans, and what we're hoping from this podcast is to start the little brain cells going, get that discussion going about your list, the top 5 list. And we're going to have a different list every edition of this podcast. In our first list, is the top 5 wrestlers never to be world champion. So I'm going to start with my 5, and I'm just going to toss a name out to you guys. And if he's on your list, let us know. If he's not, he's not.
We
Zach,
got
you
to
have your hands up.
qualify, yes, because we're doing only WWF, WWE.
Right.
And are we starting with the 5th person on each
fifth-
of the
yes.
list? Okay.
Yes.
And work our way
person.
up. Okay.
My 5th one is the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase. Now, Ted DiBiase, here's a guy back in the late 80s, early 90s who made a lot of waves throughout the industry. There's still times on ESPN Radio where I say everybody's got a price. We're talking about athletes and coaches, and we still use that phrase almost 25 years later, and he's a great wrestler in the ring. I have Ted DiBiase at number 5. I don't even know if he's on any of your guys' lists.
Oh, he's on mine, except
He's
on
on
mine,
mine.
he's number 2.
Number 2, the $1 Million Man.
Number 2.
Wow. Not on my list, guys.
He's not on your list.
No, much respect for the $1 Million Man, but he didn't make the list.
Here's my thing. Here's why number 2 sticks out for me. The man was being groomed to be the NWA champion at a time where it was Ric Flair and Harley Race. He came over, got a monster push, main evented WrestleMania 4 with Savage. In the years of Hogan, he main evented a WrestleMania. On top of that, he was always in the main event picture. I mean, how do you not have Tig? I don't know. How do you not have him?
You know what? Who needs the world title when you got the $1 Million championship?
That's right. He had his own world title.
He had his own championship.
Guys, I have breaking news for you. Not only is he on my list, he's number 1 on my list.
Oh, yeah.
$1 Million Man Ted DiBiase.
I don't agree with that, though.
$1 Million Man Ted DiBiase is the greatest heel that I've ever seen in professional wrestling.
The greatest heel of all time.
Yes, and as wrestling was exploding in the 1980s, you mentioned, hey, he headlined WrestleMania 4. he was the antagonist for all of professional wrestling at that time. You mentioned the technical side of things. He was the best technical wrestler at that time. He's a King of the Ring winner. He's main evented WrestleMania, and he was a flat out a gimmick king. I mean, this guy was rubbing guys like Hogan, like Savage, like Jake Roberts. Those are all three independent feuds. Those were the biggest guys in the business at the time, and he was the bad guy. He was the heel.
You bring up the gimmick, and I wonder if it's Ted DiBiase almost getting not enough credit because of how often that gimmick is copied. I mean, we see so many wrestlers throughout, maybe it's even JBL or Alberto Del Rio. When you are going to be the heel wrestler, you go with the gimmick of, I'm richer than you. I have more money than you. And it's originally started with Ted DiBiase, and everyone's stolen that gimmick because it works. It always works.
I read that character was created because that was the character that Vince said that he would want to be. And they patterned that character after Vince. And here's the other thing for me with Ted DiBiase, why he happens to be number one on my list, is that he was so good and so big and such a great heel that wrestling never felt like they needed to put the belt on him. He occupied his own space in the business, and for that reason, he's number one on my list.
I'm going to swing it back to Zach here just because DiBiase went one on his list. So I want to see who's number 5 on your list.
Yeah.
Number 5 on my list is Owen Hart. The brother of Bret, kind of lived in the shadow for the longest time, and that was even a storyline at one point in the early to mid-90s. But a 2-time Intercontinental champion, 4-time tag team champion. He won King of the Ring 94. And when I was making this list, I'm like, what are guys' moments? Like when I think of like moments, what are Owen's moments? And I think of, he was wrestling Bret at WrestleMania 10, and I think it may have got Match of the Year or was in the conversation for Match of the Year when they did that at year's end. And I remember him in the steel cage against Bret, him winning the Intercontinental Champion against Rocky Maivia, and him being in the Hart Foundation. He was so good technically, an underrated personality, and he's number 5 on my list of the top wrestlers to never win the world title.
Does anybody else have Owen Hart on their list?
Now, do we count? Because Owen easily is one of my honorable mentions. He's not on my list, but you gotta make him an honorable mention. The only reason I don't quite put him at the top 5 is simply my list, when I look at all the other names, they transcended the business. Not to say Owen didn't, but Owen wasn't quite at the level that a lot of them were.
I actually agree with you on that. That a lot of these guys that I'm sure their names are going to come up, did transcend the business. Guys like Piper or Jake the Snake, what I'm sure you guys are going to mention at some point. But that's what makes these lists great, because they're all subjective.
But, Owen didn't make my list, but much respect for him. And I saw him pre-Blue Blazer when he was in WWE. I saw him at a house show as the Blue Angel.
Wow.
They brought him out. I forget who he wrestled, but he wrestled as the Blue Angel. That did not last long. It was short. Probably a couple of weeks later, we'd see him on TV as the Blue Blazer. And but just a great technical wrestler.
Really was.
Definitely. It didn't make my list, but I'll agree with you.
And we've got to remember,
wrestler.
as Austin was on his way up, they used Owen as a rival of Austin, in that 96, 97 range, that he was a great guy for Austin to work with, both great wrestlers, and it helped put Austin continuously over.
Owen 316.
Yeah, my only issue with Owen Hart is that if Owen Hart's name is Owen Johnson, or Owen Hart's name is Owen Jones, does he still have the same type of impact in professional wrestling?
I think he'd have a bigger
But it wasn't.
Right.
But it wasn't.
His last name was Hart.
Right.
So he got all these things because he was Bret's brother, and it's easy storylines. You can push it all off.
But I
of
don't
that.
think that takes away from his in-ring. Like, Charlotte is where Charlotte's at now because why? Right? She's Flair's daughter.
Sure.
But that doesn't take away that she's one of the best female wrestlers we've ever seen, if that makes sense.
It definitely does.
I think, personally, if Owen didn't have the last name of Hart, he would have been better. Because the thing is, he always had to stand in Bret Hart's shadow. He could never get past that. Look at it this way. You saw Bret face Yokozuna millions of times. Put Owen in that match. Do you see it? Does it work?
Yeah, very interesting.
I like that.
Owen's not on my list. I'm going to let the guys from Q decide who wants to go with their fifth now. Vinny or Tig, one of you guys decide your fifth one here.
Well, Tig's motioning to me. Number 5 for me, Razor Ramon, Scott Hall. Easily number 5 to me because when he came in mid-92, he was on a Survivor Series team with Ric Flair that year.
That's right.
He main evented, obviously didn't main event because the Rumble is the main event, but he wrestled for the WWF Championship at Rumble 93 against
Bret Hart, yeah.
And from that point on, I mean, he catapulted the 1-2-3 Kid. Would have been nothing without Razor Ramon. One thing. The thing that screwed Razor Ramon is he was a face. Look at what he did just there. Everything I just mentioned, he was a heel. If he had stayed a heel, he could have been another opponent for Bret. He could have been an opponent for Diesel. If he was a heel, he probably would have been champion.
All right, I got to hop in here on Razor Ramon because my list has Razor Ramon at number 1.
Wow.
He is number 1 for me.
And I thought mine was a shocker.
And here's why. And maybe I'm using too much of the sports, and I love how you did the ESPN thing because this is maybe why I have him at number 1. Zach and I cover sports for a living. And we know sometimes, especially in the recruiting game, where coaches make mistakes. Hey, this kid was a 2-star prospect. He should have been a 5-star prospect. Look at the impact he's had. You go to the professional level, you see quarterback decisions made all the time to think, this guy should have been our starter, but we let him sit on the bench. Look what happens when Razor Ramon gets that push in WCW. Look at how the industry changed when he jumped. Now, I get it. This list is about the WWF, and I shouldn't factor in what he did at WCW. But watching that, and if you were to sit down and ask Vince McMahon, did you make a mistake not pushing Scott Hall and Razor Ramon to the moon? Even he would sit back and think, boy, this is the guy who threw the biggest punch at our industry, and we had him basically sitting in the mid-card. Now, getting some matches, but never being the top guy. And that's why I look and think, what could have been the Monday Night Wars if they never moved? They wouldn't have existed. He would have been the guy. So that's why, for me, he's number 1 because of the impact he had on the industry.
Vince has actually openly said that if Scott had stayed in WWF, Diesel 2, maybe they wouldn't have been as rich. Maybe they wouldn't have gotten those guaranteed contracts. Maybe there wouldn't have been a Monday Night Wars. But Scott Hall would be a much healthier man today. So maybe if he had stayed, he could have become champion. He may have turned heel. Imagine him versus Austin, maybe 98, instead of waiting until 2002 when the man was a wreck.
And Hall, the one thing that I don't think anyone has mentioned thus far, and really rarely gets mentioned about Hall, he could work. I mean, he wasn't just the gimmick without the substance in the ring. I mean, Scott Hall, Razor Ramon, I mean, he had the charisma. He could cut a promo, but also when he got in the ring, for his size, I mean, what was Hall,
that's
like 6'9"?
Who can he even compare him to? Because usually the big guys in wrestling is a Kane, an Undertaker, a Big Show, who's a 7-footer who does the big power moves. He's an athlete at 6'8" and is moving around the ring like a guy who's 6 foot. Nobody's like him in the history of wrestling that I can at least remember.
Good point. Very good point.
All right, Tig, we're going to get your number 5 on your list.
All right, I'm going to tell you that I lean towards the old school a lot. So you're going to find my list to be mostly old school wrestlers.
That's what this is about, though. It's your list, man.
This is it. This is my list. I got to go with number 5, Jake the Snake Roberts.
Ooh.
He's on mine.
Here is a guy I had his posters on my wall as a young kid growing up. You know, devious and just the way he wrestled, coming down, down the aisle with Damien in the bag. The feud with Ricky Steamboat. I remember as a kid.
Oh, yeah.
I remember as a kid watching him DDT Ricky Steamboat on the concrete
on the
floor.
outside of the ring.
And like, wow. And
allegedly that was real.
And it was. And years later, matter of fact, last year, met Ricky Steamboat at an event and talked to him about that. And he said, yeah, he actually was hurt from that. And afterwards, Jake apologized up and down. And Ricky was like, it happens. It happens. It actually, he was a little rough sometimes.
And actually, you talk about Jake. Jake wasn't that unsimilar from, I don't know if unsimilar or dissimilar from Scott Hall. Both really big guys, a little bit of brown sugar on the chest.
Oh, yeah.
and kind of had a similar style. It took a lot. I put my candidates at the top. Jake the Snake is right there. He didn't make my list, but
Ooh.
Jake the Snake Roberts, and I read this a couple different places, that he was so over in the late 80s and early 90s that they considered putting him against Hogan. And at house shows, Jake was actually moving the needle more than Hulk, that they did not want to put him on TV against Hogan because they feared that Hogan wouldn't have the majority of the needle movement.
Hulk was getting booed. Hulk was actually getting booed. They wouldn't put it on TV.
Yeah.
And this is the one thing in wrestling where I guess younger fans and maybe guys like us, we kind of get this where the belt, whether it be a world championship, a U.S. title, an IC title, some guys whose character is not getting over, they need the belt to show some legitimacy.
Yes.
Because Jake was so good at what he did.
He didn't need it.
He didn't need it, which is, unfair to a legacy. But because he's so good at his character, he becomes this guy who you just tune in to see him. He's number 3 on my list. He is number 3 on the list of guys who are never champions. And I feel like modern day, and maybe this is too much of a compliment for the guy who's doing it now, but aren't we looking at a modern-day Jake and Bray Wyatt? Bray Wyatt never gets a title shot.
Okay.
He's
Yeah, I
got
can
this
see it.
creepy sign to him. No one really puts him in the title picture. But if you'd ask old-school wrestling fans, even guys like us, would be the work Wyatt's doing. Now, sometimes he might get stale, and maybe they got to do something with him, but it's amazing. It's must-see with the things and the fireflies and all that. He's a modern-day Jake.
I want to say this. Vinny, you said, when I talked about Owen Hart, you said, Owen's not on my list because I have guys that transcended the business. Jake is one of those guys. Now, he's not on my list, but there's these names in music and movies that young kids, they could have never seen an Elvis Presley, but they know the name Elvis. Jake the Snake Roberts, you can still say that name, and a 14-year-old kid has no idea and what the hell you're talking about, but he knows he's heard that name before.
Yes.
He's heard an uncle talk about it.
Yep.
He's heard his dad talk about it, and that's what Jake the Snake Roberts did for the business.
If your first name is Jake, they may just call
Jake
you
the
the
Snake.
Snake.
Yeah.
They may have no idea what is going
Right.
on, but okay, I'll roll with it.
He always had the cool factor. I mean, WrestleMania 3, Alice Cooper coming down with him.
that's right.
I mean, it was amazing. And what he went through watching that documentary on him and how he's cleaned up his act. He just played at Albany, by the
I
way.
was just
did
going to
a
say, he was just
comedy
here.
show.
Yeah.
I mean, lots of respect for him for cleaning up his act because he was a mess. You've seen YouTube videos of him in recent
yeah.
years.
He was smoking crack.
Yeah, he's whipping his junk out in the middle of the
yes.
ring. I mean,
Yeah, man.
Some people think the movie Beyond the Mat, because of that, the movie The Wrestler was made. So the character, the wrestler Mickey Rourke plays, is actually based off of Jake the Snake Roberts.
Yes.
that's right? Yeah.
I'm going back to my list here. I feel like every one of us has one big surprise on their list that they may not feel confident about, and this is mine coming up here at number 4. But hear me out for a second. You guys are probably going to think I'm nuts. Number 4 on my list is Bam Bam Bigelow. Now, hear me out about Bam Bam for a
Beast
second.
from the East.
That's right.
Rest in peace. We miss
Bam
him.
Bam. He main events, which I almost forgot he main evented this WrestleMania with Lawrence Taylor. That's the main event.
WrestleMania 11.
Right? That goes on at the end.
the main event.
WrestleMania 11.
Bam Bam has the fact
I was
where
there, Hartford, Connecticut.
Were you?
You were
Yeah.
at WrestleMania 11?
Yep.
Big man!
Yep, that was the main event.
Awesome.
Yep.
Oh, my
Did
God.
you-
That was
did
that was
you
a
touch
Diesel
Pamela
Michaels.
Anderson?
That
Yes.
was Diesel Michaels.
That was Diesel
Well,
Michaels.
It was a co-main event.
Yep.
And really, a lot of people in the business, and sorry guys, I mean, but a lot
No, I
of
was
people in
taking
the
a sip. It
business,
worked.
a lot of people in the business were upset that was the main event because it wasn't a true wrestler to
Yes.
finish the biggest event of the year. But sorry, go
But
ahead.
no, I want to go back to WrestleMania 11 because you were there. As they
Yeah.
say, Chris Berman, I remember
Yeah.
because I was there. It was the New York Giants around the ring, right?
Yes.
For that,
Yes.
like almost lumberjack
Yeah.
style. What was, if you can even remember now, way back when?
Remember Ken Norton was there?
That's right. The reactions. LT was the big face, or were there still fans rooting for Bam Bam?
There were some. It was kind of mixed. You had a mixed crowd there with that one.
I remember
was,
that got started.
I was rooting for Bam Bam.
That got started at Royal Rumble 95.
Yeah.
When Bam Bam's on the outside of the ring and LT's on the outside. They have that little exchange and like Bam Bam kind of looks away and they gives him the bam. And it's just like, whoa, this is on.
But there's something about Bam Bam Bigelow where, for guys that are not like us and female fans, also, if you were to explain pro wrestling to them, say, hey, I got something here. I got a guy with a head tattoo who is 400 pounds.
and the head
can
tattoo's a ball of flame.
Yeah, and he can do moonsaults. Do you think he could be a professional wrestler? Or do you think
moonsault?
Right. Or do you think people would pay money to see that? There is some like Barnum and Bailey circus thing with Bam Bam Bigelow, but he could go. Like, he
No
could
doubt.
wrestle.
Yeah.
Which is just amazing to think about that. If you were to give him a title, and maybe even the early 2000s, I don't want to say late 90s because that's a little different, just different era. If you give Bam Bam a title in the 2000s, he can't have a run? Of course he could. He could be a big star, big beast, and turn him heel. I like Bam Bam Bigelow here.
How come he couldn't get a run in 95? Look at what. Okay, you want to know what the SummerSlam main event in 95? Well, not the main.
That was a tag team.
Main event.
It was Diesel and Bam Bam versus King Mabel and
Mabel.
No,
Mabel was in. It's a flat up title match.
Oh yeah,
to my
that
knowledge.
was against Diesel. Yes.
Now
yes.
you're telling me, Bam Bam couldn't have taken Mabel's spot,
Right, and why not?
Yeah.
Why is Mabel even in?
And
I
that
get
would have been a
King of the
better
ring.
That
but-
would have that would have gone over much better. And I think a Bam Bam Bigelow is almost like a degree smaller version of Vader, because Vader was that big body that could go in the ring. He could truly wrestle. Both did the moonsault. Both had the high acrobatic ability.
Right.
And Bam Bam, he's not on my list. I didn't even think of him, but I'm not going to disagree, because they could, like Vader, could have done a lot more with that character.
I agree 100%. And I want to say really quick, we were talking about Jake. Jake's number 4 on my list.
Jake, number 4 on your list.
Yes.
Okay. Your list across the board, you can go either 4 here, or you can just jump to where you think may be a surprise. Zach or Vinny, pick one of your spots.
Yeah, so number 4 on my list, and he may be, I have a feeling that he could be in the top 1 or 2 with you guys. But number 4 on my list is a transcendent name that rings out today and will forevermore with wrestling fans, and that's Rowdy Roddy Piper.
Oh, yeah.
He was a larger-than-life personality. You talk about transcendent, he's the definition of it. From the very start of WrestleMania 1, where he's in that tag match with Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff versus Hogan and Mr. T, the hair match with
Adrian
Adonis
Oh,
at
yeah.
WrestleMania 3 is another one for me. And, you know, the way he had these moments on Piper's Pit, and I know this is not technically the wrestling side of it, but these moments on Piper's Pit, you know, Andre turns heel on Piper's Pit.
That's right.
Andre was the biggest star this business had ever seen, and he rips off that Hulkamania shirt on Piper's Pit. And you remember WrestleMania 5 when Morton Downey Jr. is out there blowing the smoke. He's like, I tell you, stop blowing the smoke in my face. You know, and he brings out the extinguisher, and it's Morton Downey Jr.
Let's not forget about the coconut, the famous moment with Jimmy Superfly Snuka.
That's one. And then also, I think of these moments with Rowdy Piper, that match at WrestleMania 8 with Bret the Hitman Hart. That's another one for me. And then even a late resurgence, not only in WCW, but in WWF, when he had that backlot brawl at WrestleMania 12 with
Goldust in a thong.
Yeah, and they're taking the OJ footage.
I have Piper on my list. I had Piper at number 2. Almost was number 1 for me. I had him at number 2.
Really? See, Piper to me, 100% number 1. How can he not be number 1 to me? And first off, just want to say,
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubblegum.
I mean,
how come? I'm just saying. Yeah, I'm just saying. Hogan didn't create a line like that.
No, and obviously that's still something that gets said today, but that's what Piper did. I mean, he did it in and out of the ring, and I know like aren't taking like movies into account, but he's like outside of The Rock, and I guess Hogan to a degree, he had a couple movies, but Piper like had like reoccurring spots in movies.
Zach said something interesting earlier, that he believed Ted DiBiase was the greatest heel in professional wrestling history. Vinny, did you put him at 1 Piper because you believe Piper is the greatest heel in professional wrestling history?
No, Piper is number 1 to me because, I mean, he went to WCW, didn't get a run there. He should have. He was in WWE, didn't get a run there. He should have. Now, back to what you had said about Jake, didn't so much need it.
He didn't need the title.
Or Ted DiBiase. You had said that about Ted DiBiase.
Yeah, all three.
A
lot of these guys, yeah.
They didn't really need the belt. Jake, in my opinion, though, he didn't need it. He didn't need any belt. But the thing is, his matches carried him. His gimmick carried him. Honestly, that's all he needed. But number 1 to me, just flat out, because he's the biggest name.
The only thing, and he is the biggest name, and I'll give you that. But what held me back from putting him higher on my list, and he's on the list. I mean, shit, if you're top 5, we're talking elite company here.
Yeah.
So we're splitting hairs. But the reason he's not on my list, I never fell in love with him in the ring. I didn't think Roddy Piper was a great wrestler. He was good. He put on good matches. You give him something to work with, and he'll dance with them. But I didn't think that he was ever the guy in my mind, in my own mind's eye. I only speak for myself.
And that was the difference. I almost put Piper in one. It was a fight for me between Razor and Piper, and that was the difference because there was some part of it where it was, okay, if I put Piper in a ring with Razor, and again, I try to use if I take myself away from it, what would people say about the match? They would look at a 6'8" Razor and think, oh, he just lifted a dude up over his head and on his back and did the Razor's Edge, while Piper would put somebody in the sleeper hold. Like, there's just some part of it where it's like the entertainment side of it, you would lean towards Razor, but if we were to put a camera and a microphone in front of these guys, of course Piper's would talk of course, he would talk his way out of anything. And that's why it was so tough for me.
And that's what made him a star. I mean, that's what put him in movies, that personality. I mean, Vince McMahon was trying to buy him out of his Jim Crockett deal to get him over to WWF at the time. Tig, is Piper on your list?
Piper is on my list. You want to know where he's at?
Yeah.
He's number 2.
Yeah, same with me, number 2.
Yep.
So he's on everyone's list.
Oh, yeah.
Is Piper the first name that's been on everyone's list so far? I think that's the case because Jake is not on mine.
Jake wasn't on yours.
Owen's not on your guys.
Ted DiBiase, someone left. I think Tig, you didn't have Ted DiBiase,
Tig
right?
didn't have.
So Piper, everyone had Piper.
Okay, so he's the first guy that gets the stamp from everyone.
And for me, because I did Bam Bam there at 4, my list is already done. So we've addressed everybody on my list already.
Run down your list real quick.
My list, again, is the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase at 5, Bam Bam Bigelow at 4, Jake the Snake Roberts at 3, Roddy Piper at 2, and Razor Ramon at 1. The top 5 wrestlers never to be world champion. All right, so whoever wants to hop in next year,
who's got a name that hasn't been mentioned yet? Tig, do you have a name?
I got Ricky Steamboat.
Ooh, that's a good one. He was to be considered.
Him. Yeah, do you want me to run down the list quick?
No.
Or are we just saying?
Let's talk
just talk about Ricky.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Ricky. I mean, him versus Savage, WrestleMania 3.
Arguably best ever.
Best ever, and his matches with Ric Flair in WCW, legendary. I mean, just the guy was awesome. What a great performer.
You know what the thing about Steamboat that I wonder now, and maybe it's just a fan developing in wrestling, what if Ricky Steamboat wrestled in 2015?
I think he'd be a champion.
Wouldn't he be the Kevin Owens and the CM Punk and the Dean Ambrose and like the Daniel Bryan? Because
still in amazing shape, that guy.
Right?
Yeah, and he is.
He worked in 2009. He did a match against Jericho.
That's
Backlash.
Right, that's right. Well, here's my only thing with Ricky Steamboat. Great wrestler. That is the most non-controversial thing ever. We all understand his character was not great. His personality was not great. Like, if you watch him try to do a promo, and I'm not going to boil him down to a promo, but he didn't have a person. It was almost like a lot like Bret Hart, where Bret Hart is a great wrestler and a great character, but doesn't have like the it factor. And Ricky Steamboat had all the in-ring stuff. I mean, Ricky Steamboat could go with anyone in WWF history. But when it comes to actually putting him over the top as a transcendent, and maybe he is transcendent, he's in the conversation, but I don't think that he resonated as a personality.
He was one of the first really, really top-notch workers. But like you said, that personality is what brought him down. But the dude could go.
No doubt.
He could go. He pretty much started Austin's career. Austin's first solo title, I believe his first solo title was won from Steamboat. No, that's wrong. He won a TV title in 91.
You said Steamboat?
He did win a U.S. title from Steamboat in 93. That launched Austin's career.
Yeah, you know what, you're right, and I forgot about that. Steamboat is Steamboat.
But that's the thing, again, back to now, the era. Look at the people we appreciate the most. Finn Balor barely knows English. He's not from England, but people love how he goes in the ring. Daniel Bryan, as good as he's been and got as over as he didn't get over because of promos. He got over because of the yes chant. Yep. That's why he got over. Seth Rollins and Dean Ambrose were making waves because of how great matches they were putting on. Kevin Owens has gotten better on the mic, but Steamboat would be so great right now. He would be the internet darling. He'd be like the Chris Jericho of the early 2000s if he just wrestled in a different era.
I'll say this about Steamboat. Early on as a kid, those my early days watching wrestling, WWF on Saturday mornings. Ricky Steamboat, Don Morocco. Don
yeah.
Morocco
Don the
hanging
Rock.
him
That was
by the belt.
another great rivalry.
As a kid, was shocked that I'm worried about Ricky Steamboat's well-being. Like, they're hanging him.
about his well-being.
You know, the Steamboat Morocco, great feud. His feud with Jake Roberts, of course. But I'll say this, later on, I couldn't stand what Vince did to Steamboat on his second run with WWE.
The fire breathing and all that?
With the fire breathing and the foam armbands and the stupid dragon headdress. It was embarrassing.
Yeah, and
I don't think he wanted to do that. But
no, I don't think so either.
Yeah.
And it took away from some of the luster that he had previously, because Steamboat was like revered even within the business. Like the guys, like he was like a guy to the guys, and I think they took some of that away from him.
It was as bad as Dusty Rhodes with the polka dots.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, come on.
Well, when Steamboat left WWE, he went to WCW NWA, and he was putting on 60-minute matches with Flair.
Yeah,
winning,
amazing matches.
Winning.
Yep.
So he became a champion.
Yeah.
And then came back to WWF. And, yeah, I mean...
I can't wait to do when we come back and do like top 5 matches. I think we'll all have
hard.
WrestleMania 3, him and Savage on that list, because me and my boy Roush, we watched that match a year ago, and we just like looked at each other and we're like, if this, I've always believed this about music. If you dropped a great song in 1990 or in 1966, if the Beatles released Revolver right now in 2016, I believe it would still go to #1, because greatness is greatness is greatness. And Ricky Steamboat was great, and that match is one of the best ever,
if not the best.
if not the best.
Yeah.
All right, we'll go back to Zach and Vinny's list here. Guy we have not mentioned yet who is major top 5.
I've got one. My number 3 pick, Mr. Perfect, Kurt Hennig.
Oh, love it.
Kurt Hennig, to me, he could bump to hell. He was an AWA champion. Came in with a lot of esteem, undefeated for I believe at least a year.
#1 on my list.
There we
Number
go.
Perfect.
Yes.
Number 2 on my list.
Wow.
Mr.
Now,
Perfect.
Mr. Perfect. He made, the Intercontinental title was relevant at the time. He was able to keep it relevant. Look what happened after him. Brett kept it, but then the Mountie held it for only a few days. Dropped off. Piper didn't need it. Went back to Brett, didn't need it. Went to Davey Boy Smith, didn't need it. It didn't really do much for a few years after Mr. Perfect.
If it's possible to put a title over when it's already over, that's what Mr.
He
Perfect
did it with the
to
IC belt.
IC title. Mr. Perfect is number 2 on my list. 2-time Intercontinental Champion. If you remember, when he first came in, I was in awe. I was a little kid.
Were you watching what do they call them?
The vignettes?
The
Oh, yeah.
vignettes. Were they incredible? The basketball shot.
He bowled the perfect game.
Perfect game. They went the darts.
The darts. Wade Boggs is trying to put him over in a
Love
vignette.
those. I love those.
But Mr. Perfect for me, the in-ring check, a big old bold check. It's technically sound. The man, the look for me was like, this guy has me convinced that he's perfect. He's got the curly, long blonde hair. Now
The
I'm
chewing
straight,
up the gum.
I'm straight as
The
an arrow.
gum and
I'm
hitting it
married,
with
right?
his-
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, how cool
I
is
get it.
that?
But that dude is a stud, right? What he used to do with the towel, he'd throw it behind him, and Heenan would be there to catch it. You know how he'd knock the gum out. Mr. Perfect for me. When I think of wrestling royalty, I think of Mr. Perfect.
That gum scenario, I was playing high school basketball, and a guy got tossed out of a game. I still remember this. Faith Heritage actually was not played. It was against our rival school. We went to the game. And kid gets tossed out of the game, their best player. He spits out the gum and swats it into the crowd. Perfect sound. Like,
You know how many times as a young kid I attempted
my
that
God.
move and could not do it.
I've thrown the
I
towel
could not
behind
do
my
it.
back. Never caught it, but I've done it.
I mean, Perfect was
I
the
guess
best.
my
He really
only issue, because I'm the only one who didn't have Mr. Perfect on the list, is that,
Why?
and here's why. If you're going to go with the Mr. Perfect gimmick and all that I loved the vignettes, I loved him in the ring, you better get a push to the moon, because there's going to be a believability factor where it's like, okay, this guy's perfect, but why is he losing matches? Your name is Mr. Perfect, but you're losing. There's a believability factor in wrestling. We see matches with Rey Mysterio at times versus The Big Show, and you have to say, okay, how in the world is Rey going to compete with The Big Show?
Turn your brain off for a second.
There's one part of professional wrestling where, okay, why is Andre the Giant, The Big Show, Kane, Undertaker not winning every match? Okay, we can figure it out. You'll do storylines, development, all that stuff. Sneaky wins, whatever. But if your name is Mr. Perfect, you better go a year and a half being perfect. We saw Goldberg, allegedly, I put an asterisk next to this, 173-0. Shouldn't you flop the names?
Yeah.
No, Goldberg should be Mr. Perfect, and he should be Goldberg. That's how I feel about Mr. Perfect.
I agree. I agree with your stance fundamentally, but I won't hold his mishandling against him. You see what I'm saying? Like the same thing with Vader. Vader should have been maximized. Bam Bam Bigelow should have been maximized. I believe that Mr. Perfect, especially during those years after Hogan was taking a step back from the spotlight, that they're looking for that next guy, and it happened to be Brett and Yoko a little bit there, kind of a bridge champion. I think Mr. Perfect could have been the world champion. A lot of these guys that I have on my list, Owen Hart's on my list of top 5 guys never to win a world title. But do I believe in my heart of hearts that Owen could carry the world title? I don't really believe that, but that doesn't mean he's not on my list. Perfect. He's on the other side of the coin. I think he could have carried the title.
And you know what? If he's a heel wrestler and you get him go 6 months and he doesn't lose, the ovation that babyface would get if all of a sudden you go, Perfect's not losing a match, but then he's trying to do the thing like, oh yeah, Mr. Perfect, and then he has his foot on the ropes. Or then he does something where he gets a 2 count or a quick 3, and you can build all this heat and this heat and this heat around him, and then you put somebody over with Perfect. I could see that for sure. But again, the mishandling of Perfect, man, if he'd come out maybe like how Lex Luger debuted at one of the Rumbles, where all of a sudden like you're pushing him and saying, look, this is the guy who's the best, he can't be beat. Maybe that's why I'm inclined not to go with Perfect. Is there anybody else on your guys' list that we have not touched on yet?
Tig, do you got a name?
Mr. Wonderful, Paul Orndorff.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Yeah. Now that's a throwback.
I mean, come on. Bobby Heenan, the stable with him and Cowboy Bob Orton. Paul Orndorff, Cowboy Bob Orton, King Kong Bundy, Big John Studd. Paul Orndorff, who could deliver a pile driver like Paul Orndorff?
Do we know
back in the day? I mean, I thought he was amazing.
Do we know if Cowboy Bob Orton's arm is okay? I know he's had the cast on for what seems like 40 years now. Is that recovered?
I think he's got Hep C, doesn't he?
I think he does. Paul Orndorff is one of those names where, why was Orndorff not bigger than Billy Graham? Why was he not the modern day It just questions I just don't understand, because he had everything those guys had.
Yep.
He's the same wrestler. And he has a better name.
Yeah,
and he got
wonderful.
He had a great look too. I mean, physically, Paul Orndorff was as put together. He didn't have the big, bulky, broad Billy Graham or Hogan. He was more compact, but muscles just on top of muscles, and
some shape that man.
Yeah, and he could talk. I mean, he could wrestle, and that's why when Vince McMahon is putting together this first time ever mega event that didn't even make sense to some people. We're gonna bring the best of every card, and we're gonna put them together for a Super Bowl of wrestling. Paul Orndorff has his name at the top of that card.
And they're kind of doing it right now with the current product. Wouldn't you say Bobby Roode in NXT is sort of, they're trying to do like a Mr. Wonderful Light. Yeah. He's trying to be Mr. Glorious, and everyone loves it. The fans are eating it up.
And he's a heel.
They're just trying to copy that again to see if it's going to work.
Yeah, that is his founding father of that character. Okay, I got a name that hasn't been named, and I'm curious to see if he's on your list. This is a guy you talk about put together physically. You talk about charisma. You talk about in-ring ability.
Is it the gobbledygooker?
He'd step in the ring with a robe and say, for all you high-rolling Atlantic City sweat hogs, keep the noise down and give the ladies a good look at the sexiest man alive.
The ravishing
Rick Rude, baby.
Yeah, he was great.
I mean, you're talking about a transcendent guy for wrestling fans. That name still rings out. His feud with Jake the Snake Roberts. I remember, we talked about Jake earlier, when Rick Rude, this is like asinine, put Jake's wife's face on his tights,
on his crotch,
on his junk.
Yep.
Like that, you talk about being ahead of your time. Yeah. I think they may turn down that now.
Yeah,
they would.
He had her face on his junk. I mean, dude, Rick Rude, the super pose down, what was that, at SummerSlam, I think. His battles with the Warrior, his steel cage match at SummerSlam with the Warrior.
Blue cage.
Yeah, the blue cage. Love that big old blue square, baby. Rick Rude comes in at number 3 on my list.
I remember watching him on old World Class Championship Wrestling episodes back in the early years out of Texas there. Where was the Sportatorium?
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
Dallas
Sportatorium. That's
Sportatorium.
right.
The Von Erichs and all that. Rude was there. Great.
right.
He always had potential, and he blew up.
Rick Rude
in
would be.
WWF.
Oh yeah, Rick Rude would be the guy where if your friend had never been to the show, you'd say, "Wait till this guy
Yeah.
comes out."
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
would be the show. He would have you laugh.
And the girls were going crazy. If you
Yes.
watch those old world-class championship wrestlings where it was just a little thin rope,
Yeah.
surrounding the
Yeah.
fans, the women were, jumping on them.
Steaming. They were
it was
steaming up.
crazy. Yeah, just like with the Von Erichs.
I'm not trying to
clam
judge
bake.
a guy's looks either, but I don't know. I mean,
Go
he
ahead,
didn't
sound off, Vinny.
He really didn't have like those looks that you think, oh my god.
Yeah.
But he was so put together physically. It's almost like someone like had
Porno
a piece
stash.
of clay.
Yeah, he had the
and was-
70s porn star look.
Yeah, he did it, and he's got the thickest head of hair I've ever seen.
Oh, I thought you were going to say thick as something.
I mean, you can see it through Jake Roberts' wife's face.
That's right.
She's sticking her tongue out. Yeah,
There's some head.
But Rick Rude, okay. Rick Rude, to me, had the personality. He could cut a promo. He had the in-ring and his look. I don't feel like he was maximized in WWF. But I remember those moments. I think about moments. The steel cage match and the super pose down. It's not a wrestling. It's not an actual substance of a match. But the super pose down, that was like, remember he's in there with Heenan and he's got the bar and he's like pinching the bar together and trying to get his pecs swelled up and they're naming the poses and Gene Okerlund's out there. So now he'll do them, butterfly back there. He's rotating to the different directions of the crowd. Rick Rude is number 3 on my
And
list.
Heenan was so great with him.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
Oh, my God.
Heenan worked great with everybody. Man, that guy, I miss him so much.
Me too.
I mean, the team of him and Gorilla Monsoon.
Oh, come on.
I mean,
we
come
were
on.
talking about today, guys,
yeah,
and
this
I,
is-
Oh,
with
stop.
the barbershop, with the barbershop when Shawn Michaels turned on Marty Jannetty,
Yeah.
his Rocker's partner, and he threw him through the barbershop window. Heenan, well, first of all, right before he chin music's Marty Jannetty, he goes, they need each other. We all know that.
Damn, I knew he was going to do that.
He was going to do that. And then he throws him through the barbershop window. And Heenan goes, look at him trying to jump through the window like a coward.
Heenan was the best on the color commentary,
Oh,
man.
my God.
I have heard a good story about Heenan where they were out for Caesar's Palace, WrestleMania 9. And this group, Asian tourists, they're just trying to get their picture taken in front of the pond there.
Yeah.
So they give him the camera, and they start back. He's like, no, back a little bit more. Almost keep going a little bit. Splash!
No
He
way.
walks them backwards into the pond, and then sets the camera down on the edge.
If you remember WrestleMania 9 too, when they do the intros, it's like all this pomp and circumstance, and they got all the things out, and he comes out backwards on the donkey,
Yes. I
facing
remember
the
that.
opposite direction.
I miss the primetime wrestling. Well, getting that out of probably another podcast, but primetime
yeah.
wrestling with him and Gorilla on location in Tucson. And,
Yeah, oh, yeah.
There were so many great skits.
I can't wait till we do our top 5 managers because that has
Or
to be done.
announcers even.
I don't
Oh,
know
yeah.
if we do top 5 managers. I don't know if anyone's not going to have the brain and number 1. Paul
It's
Heyman
gotta
will put
be.
up a good feud
Yeah.
with him, but man,
Bobby the Brain Man.
Rick Rude is one I want to actually go back and look at my list because it got such a reaction out of all of us that,
Yeah.
man, maybe tonight on the network, I'm going to go back and watch
I'm
some
gonna be
old
touching
Rude
it. I'm gonna be
matches.
touching
Yeah.
it tonight, no doubt.
Oh my
no
God,
doubt.
the little hand's getting used.
Did you have one we didn't hit on yet, Vinny? Or
I've already
Tig?
gone through my whole list unless you want me to mention an honorable mention.
Just recap your
Yeah,
list
yes,
real
run
quick.
them down.
for us.
All right, so number 5 on my list, Scott Hall, Razor Ramon. Number 4, Jake the Snake Roberts. Number 3, Mr. Perfect. Number 2 is Ted DiBiase. And number 1 is Roddy Piper.
All right, so we got 2 lists left. So we got Zach's, and we got Tig's. We'll swing with back.
Can I give you an honorable mention?
Sure,
I have
yeah,
one
absolutely.
other one. That way my
Yeah,
list
yeah.
is done. William Regal. William Regal is an honorable mention for me.
And that is a bad choice.
Well, here, let me explain it. Let me explain it 100%. So, when Regal came into WWE, no. 98, 99, 2000, no. Wasn't there. Regal could work. Regal could do a lot. He was a good personality. He's a good promo. He's English, but he's still a good promo. 2008, when he won King of the Ring, and he was the GM of Raw, more like, just overlord of Raw.
Yeah.
Why not? Because at that time, the World Heavyweight title, the secondary belt, was on Raw. Why not have him go over like, I believe CM Punk was champion at the time? CM Punk at the beginning of his career. How come Regal couldn't have gone over him as a tyrant, like Triple H did earlier this year, and win the belt.
The storyline makes sense. My concern with Regal is I wonder if Regal's popularity hasn't come from the fans or the diehard wrestling purists, but it's come from how many wrestlers he has trained. So I wonder if the respect has been earned through the business, because we see that wrestling is such a business based on shaking people's hands and working your way through the independents and all of those things. Kissing ass a little bit. But there's such a high regard of wrestlers for William Regal. I wonder if that, because we know the business so well, we get, okay, people love William Regal. Maybe it wasn't his character, his wrestling, no doubt. I mean, he's trained legends in the business. But I wonder if that's what holds me back on Regal, is that I feel like it's the wrestlers making him better than he is. Because that happens in sports. Like, you have teammates, and teammates love guys who aren't very good.
I mean, to that point, I mean, look at his match. Go back and watch the Nitro match he had with Bill Goldberg in '98.
No, but think about this.
That's bad.
I use this examples in sports when we talk on ESPN radio. Is when we talk about title contenders for any sport, I say, use the mental test. Close your eyes. Could you see them celebrating a championship with a parade in whatever contender you're talking about? So let's use this NFL season, for example. A team like who's on the fringe in the NFL, like a team like
the Cowboys. Are we talking about a team
Redskins? Right, Redskins are very much in contention this year. They're right in the mix of the NFC East, and if they go on a run like they did last year, they could be back in the playoffs. But close your eyes. Could you imagine the Redskins having a Super Bowl parade after the weekend after? I just can't imagine it. William Regal, I just can't imagine him being a champion.
Here's where I can imagine that. 2008. He was a tyrant. He was wearing that big old purple robe. You're telling me the World Heavyweight Championship, the big gold belt, wouldn't have looked great around his waist?
What are his moments?
When was the King Booker
He drank Chris Jericho's piss.
If that's your claim to fame, I think you're in trouble.
Okay.
Do you have...
You're
five.
I'll go through the five, and then I'll give you my honorable mention.
Yeah, definitely.
We got number 5, Jake the Snake Roberts. Number 4, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. Mr. Wonderful, Paul Orndorff. Number 3, the great Roddy Piper. So missed. I lost it when we lost him. Tears.
Yeah.
Number 2, Roddy Piper. Number 1, another one, of course, we miss. Mr. Perfect, Kurt Hennig. Honorable mention, how about, although he had his demons and his problems, I don't know if he would have lasted with a title reign, but Jimmy Superfly Snuka.
Yeah.
I thought about him.
He's a transcendent guy that his name rings out.
Another one that didn't fare so well on his second run with WWE.
No, definitely not.
And didn't fare so well with that murder
theme
charge.
Song, super.
I love that theme song. Come on.
That's awesome.
But he was still, how old is he? And he was still jumping off the ropes in his 50s and 60s.
Yeah, that's right.
Isn't he a Binghamton guy? He has some upstate New York connection.
I think he does.
He's still dancing around in the ring doing his
upstate,
thing.
as in he's going to Coxsackie for murdering his mistress. That kind of upstate.
Off the top rope for Mr. Snuka there. Jimmy Superfly Snuka, the one thing about him is, I guess if we look at his career, and I love comparing these guys in eras because sometimes we have to do it. Was Snuka the Mick Foley? You know what I mean?
It's not
falling
bad.
off a cage made his career.
That's not bad.
It kind of did, didn't it?
Foley was
And
there,
Foley
right?
was there. And Foley was
Foley
there that
influence
night.
on him.
That was in Madison Square Garden, right?
Yes.
Foley tells that
Yep.
story. He was there as a young kid.
But
that's
Don
what everyone-
Morocco. He flew right onto Don
Yeah,
Morocco
that's
off
right.
the top of the cage. That's a legendary video piece right
That was
there.
an
If you see that.
Intercontinental title match, correct?
Yeah, I believe it was.
It's not what Vince McMahon wants, but guys like Foley and Snuka understand, hey, if I have an isolated moment and the fan base says, I would like to see that again.
Yeah.
Like, can you do that that makes careers. And I feel like that's what happened with, not taking anything away from him, because you have an iconic moment in wrestling history, but I wonder if Snuka never gets off that cage if he still has that same impact on the business.
I want to say this. Go back tonight. Watch Jimmy Snuka versus The Undertaker, WrestleMania 7. Here's why I say that. I believe he was
his first WrestleMania.
Right. But Snuka was 48, 49, and he won Best Body of the Night. Dude was ripped.
Yeah.
He was ripped.
He was always in great shape, Jimmy. Yeah.
Not that good, though.
Yeah.
So our lists are done, believe it or not. We have finished this podcast, unless you got honorable mention for you, Zach.
No, I never. Well, here's my list.
We got to do the
yeah.
top
5,
Go ahead.
Owen Hart. 4, Rowdy Piper. 3, Rick Rude. 2, Mr. Perfect. And number 1, Ted DiBiase. And the honorable mention, you guys said them. We talked about Vader, Hall, and that's it. Yeah.
And that's the end of this week's podcast edition. But before we end every podcast, we got to make sure if we can do this little task, and that is try to stump the Vinny.
The Vinny.
And here's your question, Vinny. Week 1, fastball down the middle. We're doing this show in Albany. We are an Albany-based town square media company here. Royal Rumble 92 was in Albany. Ric Flair won that Royal Rumble when the world title was actually up for grabs, so the winner was the new champion.
The first time that happened.
Who did Ric Flair eliminate to win the 1992 Royal Rumble and get that world title where he famously screamed into the microphone, to be the man, you got to beat the man.
Woo! If I remember correctly, I want to say Psycho Sid Justice had a big part in that happening.
Yes.
He did.
He pulled Hogan over the top rope, eliminating Hulk Hogan for Flair to take the victory.
Correct.
There it is.
And I was there, actually. Hogan got booed out of the building that
Really?
night.
Yeah, this is interesting.
He was getting booed. What was the story about? Why was he getting booed that
He
time?
was. It was like Cena. It's
I was
just,
going
it's
to say,
been so
he had been
long.
the top for so long.
That was it. And I remember him being booed, and I'm looking at my friend, my buddy Joe. I'm like, they're booing the hell out of him. And then I watched the WWE programming the next night or a couple days later, and they dubbed in cheers.
Wow.
That is
Now,
unbelievable.
Did Flair get cheered? Eliminating Hogan. You would tend to believe Flair would get cheered.
Yeah, I think he did get cheered.
Nature Boy.
That's
But
even
did they-
better.
so
Flair
they-
was the biggest heel in the company at that time.
I think he did get some cheers. Did they put booze in the? Maybe they.
I'm
dubbed
sure
booze
they
in.
did.
They may have.
That crazy little production department over there.
Hey,
you can't
I
trust
I
them.
The
found
magical
out-
world of editing. Yeah.
I
You
was
know.
listening to Bruce Pritchard's podcast.
No, don't promote that.
Hey, no, dude's awesome. Anyway, he said that they used to manipulate the video to where they wouldn't show the top of Hogan's head.
Why?
And if they did, they'd put hair there.
Really?
That's some X-Files
Watch,
shit.
watch some old matches with the Hogan. You're not going to see the top of his head in a lot of them.
Wasn't he wearing the bandanas with fake hair?
Yeah,
he had the
yes, he
extensions.
was.
Blonde extensions
Oh,
in the
yeah.
back for
He
a
was
while.
also going on 24-hour Coke binges, letting his other wrestlers bang his wife.
Okay, but she did have big boobs.
People are into certain stuff like that.
Rumors are he's going to be back for WrestleMania.
Yeah,
I hope
he
see what
is.
happens. I
I
hope
hope
he
so
is.
too.
Do you guys want to end the podcast
Yeah,
with a
I think we
unanimous
gotta
woo?
go.
Coming up next week on As the Heel Turns, the top 5 matches in wrestling history. We're talking WCW, WWF, WWE. We don't know how far we're going to go We don't know how far we're going to go on this. Could we go back to the 70s? You're going to find out. Give us your top 5 matches in wrestling history next time on As the Heel Turns.